Carlos Nelson with Cascade Sports, and tonight we have the head of the Negro Baseball League Museum, someone that really has dominated our baseball channel, Mr. Bob Kendricks. Bob, you the president and the CEO, or give me the rundown. Give our people the
Man,
rundown. What's your
no,
position?
president is just fine. I don't need any more
You don't need
fancy
the other
titles.
headache?
No, I don't need any more fancy titles to go with it. And that role of president is just a name. I do whatever is necessary to try and get the job done here. But man, it's great to catch up with you again. And thank you, as always, for the platform that you're providing to talk about a little Negro Leagues history and what a tremendous run we've had here really over recent years. You know, Carlos, we came out of COVID at a time when so many around the world were hurting. We came out of COVID as strong as we ever been. And I'm still not sure how that happened, but it happened. And we're very blessed that we've been riding a tremendous wave of momentum ever since. And, I know we are hooking up today to talk about that history making moment of the Negro League stats being rolled into the record books of Major League Baseball, where you go back to December of 2020. As a matter of fact, December 16th of 2020 to be exact. That's when Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred made the historical announcement that Major League Baseball, first and foremost, was finally recognizing the Negro Leagues for what we already knew it to be, a major league. And then that it would roll in the statistics of the Negro Leagues into the record books of Major League Baseball's history. That was a seminal moment. And not just from the standpoint, because as you know, the Negro League players, man, they weren't looking for validation from anybody. Now, they knew how good they were. They knew how good their league was. And quite frankly, the major leaguers knew how good they were. They played countless exhibition games against one another. And the record books bear out that the Negro League teams or the Black All-Star teams won the majority of those head-to-head competitions. So they weren't seeking validation, but for historical validation, this was tremendously significant. Over the next 3 years from the time of the announcement, I call it a dream team of Negro League historians and researchers got together, and they did a tremendous job of unearthing the data that was necessary to make this happen. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, that data was officially released, and it changed the record books pretty profoundly.
I want to ask
Uh,
you this, Bob, cutting you off a little bit. You're talking about data now. Uh,
yeah.
how well was the data kept for the Negro
Well,
Leagues?
see, that was the challenge because the misnomer was that it didn't exist. It existed, but man, you had to go find it. Yeah, and as I told people metaphorically, I don't know if it was exactly finding a needle in a haystack, but it damn near was. And that's why I give so much credence to the historians and researchers. And man, these folks have been dedicated to this. They've been doing this for decades. Now, the last 3 years in an official capacity for Major League Baseball. And they had to go back and find these box scores and newspapers and so forth, and then take a formula to extract all of that and put it into a database so that we can get the quantitative data that was released here recently. And so I was joking the other day, but not really. I dodged probability and statistics for about 3 years when I was a student at Park College. So I was on the committee, but I didn't do any work. These folks did all the work, and they should get all the credit for the information that was brought forth. And like I said, it changed the statistical makeup of Major League Baseball considerably because now you got all these players from the Negro Leagues that are populating these record books, and many of them at the very top of significant statistical categories.
Run some of the categories down that you know have changed.
Well, and I think first and foremost, you see the name Josh Gibson emerge in a major way. He is now the all-time single season batting champion. He only hit 466 in 1943. He is the lifetime batting average leader, lifetime batting average of 372. He leads in on base percentage, several other categories, man. And then you're seeing the names of Oscar Charleston and
Never
Norman
even heard of
Marcus
him.
Stern. No, and see, and Oscar Charleston is in center field here at the museum on the Field of Legends. And the late, great Buck O'Neill always believed that Oscar Charleston was the greatest baseball player he had ever seen. He thought Willie Mays to be the greatest major leaguer. And most people concur because, Carlos, Willie Mays could beat you every way in which you could be beaten. He could beat you with his bat, with his arm, with his legs, with his glove. And of course, Willie Mays's illustrious professional baseball career began as a 17-year-old kid patrolling center field for the Birmingham Black Barons. That's where it all began. But Buck believed Oscar Charleston, as I mentioned, he's in center field here at the museum on the Field of Legends, that he was the greatest baseball player he had ever seen. Oscar
That's saying
Charleston,
something. Buck
that is
seen
saying,
them
because Buck,
all.
he saw them all. He really did. In 1921, Oscar Charleston led the Negro Leagues in home runs, triples, doubles, stolen bases, and batting average in the same season. The old timers in the Negro League say he was Willie Mays before we ever knew who Willie Mays was. And so to have these names now surface and be listed amongst the greats of baseball's past, I hope that it is the gateway into broader learning about these players. Because let me preface by saying this: you can never reduce the Negro Leagues to just statistics. But for that baseball fan that just needed that quantitative data, they now have it. But we know that the Negro Leagues are far bigger than just a game of baseball. And this story is so profound that the numbers will never tell the real story. And so while we're all excited because this is great acknowledgement, great recognition, you might even say to some degree atonement for some things that happened previously, a lot of people did not know that in 1969, Major League Baseball had a special committee to examine all of the professional leagues that had operated in this country and then to recognize their history in the pages of Major League Baseball's history books. And the Negro Leagues were blatantly
Left
omitted,
out.
left out.
Tell me this, Bob. Uh, how have, if you know this, how have the families now received? I was getting ready to joke. I was gonna say, you know, my friend is Willie the Groundhog, and I had him deliver a message to Josh that, hey, Josh, baby, you the man now.
And he is the man. I mean, Josh Gibson was prolific. He really was. Because for me, I believe that he is the greatest baseball player of all time. And now these numbers kind of support what I've been saying for decades.
You
Because
know
Carlos,
about him.
what he was able to do.
No, when I say this, what do you, it's I done seen some stuff. It seemed like he had a chip on his shoulder because I'm saying, and I don't know, hearsay, you know more about this, that he was not being recognized for what he had done and what have you. What
Well,
can you
it's
talk about any of that?
well, it's really interesting because Gibson dies, man, when he was 35 years old. Yeah, he was 35 when he died. He died in 1947, just a few months before Jackie breaks the color barrier. So it is debatable on if he would have gotten an opportunity at 35 to play in the major leagues, because they wanted you at 19, 20, so you could have that long career. Jackie Robinson was old by baseball standards when he joined Brooklyn. He's 28 years old. And they were able to get 10 years out of him before they wanted to trade him to the Dodgers' arch rivals, the New York Giants, and Jackie refused to go, and he retired instead. And so at 35, would Josh have gotten an opportunity to play in the major league? Skill-wise, he still had the skills, but he was sick. He was suffering from a brain tumor. And that is how he met his demise. Josh dies from that brain tumor, a stroke. He had a fatal stroke that was triggered by the brain tumor. Again, just a terrible, tragic ending to one of this game's all-time greatest players. But what he did as a catcher, that is the most demanding position on the field. And I remind people that he wasn't a good catcher. He was a great catcher. Rifle arm. He is throwing guys out from the crouch back in that era. Had complete control of his pitching staff. So he called a great game. Was a good running catcher. Gonna steal your 20, 25.
How important is it for a catcher to be able to call, like you said, call?
It's not as important today because they don't really call the game. The managers call the game now.
Oh,
But
I
back
didn't know
then, the
that.
catchers controlled the game. And Josh, gave those pitchers the confidence to throw. He put the signal down, they threw it. They weren't shaking him off. And so all the attributes, plus he had the combination of power and average that is virtually unheard of. Like I said, single season record of 466. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that record ain't going to be broken.
What about Satchel?
Everything. Satchel had everything you needed to be a star. And through what they've done with the record books,
Yeah, that's
Satchel picked up another 125, 130 wins as a result of what they were able to unearth to now go with the time that he spent in the major leagues. And of course, as you know, by the time he gets to the major leagues, Satchel is an old man.
Satchel like me.
42 or 52. Yeah, exactly.
But he's still kicking butt.
And he was. And wherever Satchel is right now, he's still kicking butt. The old man just had everything that you needed to be a star. In all sports, you always have a hierarchy. You've got those who are good, and then you've got those who are great. And greatness is reserved for a certain level. And Satchel may have exceeded even the great because he just had the goods, the combination of great stuff, longevity, and charisma. That's that rare package. That's what Muhammad Ali had.
I was getting
what I'm saying?
Compare. I seen a picture with Satchel and Sugar Ray.
Well, Sugar Ray Leonard had that same thing.
You said Muhammad, but
Muhammad
Sugar was in that
first.
same category.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, they were special because they were able to grow the game. It's one thing to excel in whatever endeavor that you embark on. It's another thing when you change the way the game is played. And Satchel was one of those game changers. And so you'll hear people say, well, such and such threw as hard as Satchel, or such and such was as good as Satchel. When you are the measuring stick that everybody else looks to measure up to, that tells you how great you were. And I can tell you this, there may be in some that was as good as Satchel, but no one was better than Satchel Paige. And like I said, when you combine all the elements that he brought to the table, again, the longevity, by his estimation, he pitched in over 2,600 games. The great stuff, recorded some 55 no-hitters and only God knows how many strikeouts, and the charisma.
That's what I want to ask you next. All right. Satchel, all the pictures I seen of him, this Negro was stylish.
Clean.
And when I look at you at events, I be like, Bob, you ain't back in the day. You ain't with them.
But you know what? I do think when you work at a museum that has this kind of history, you do kind of morph into that whole style, that dress of that era, the hats and the suits and the whole nine. Yeah, it's part of the costume. Yeah, it's part of the uniform now. And so Satchel just had, the kids would call it swag. He had swagger. And everybody wanted to be around Satchel Paige. I look at those photographs of him, man, and he's walking through the streets of Harlem. And the kids just want to hold on to him, just want to hold on to his coattail. And because that's what you admired. You saw, and I think that's the thing that Negro Leagues baseball did for our communities, because it wasn't a superficial idolization of just his baseball playing ability. No matter how much money Satchel Paige made, no matter how much money Buck O'Neill made or Josh Gibson made, they lived in the same neighborhood that you and I lived in. And we not only wanted to mimic what they did on the baseball field, but we wanted to mimic them as men.
I passed Satchel Paige house this morning. I had went to Gates to get something to eat, and I cut around, and I hadn't been in that block in a minute, and I seen the heart there, and I was thinking, what are they? Where's that house now? And I was saying, with all of these record changes, there should be some things that should be able to raise this money now to get that house done.
Yeah, well, we certainly would love to see Satchel's house restored, whatever the plan for it and how it'll be used. But to have that home restored would mean a great deal, because you could tell that it was a house that was befitting.
Oh boy, that's a large, but that
Yes,
house is large.
And I tell people all the time, if those walls could talk, the people who went in and out of that house, you're talking about some of the biggest names in Black baseball history. You're talking about some of the biggest names in jazz and entertainment. Everybody wanted to hang out with Satchel. And so that's what we talk about, the star power that he generated. He was the biggest star in a league filled with big stars, but he was by far the biggest and the brightest.
You had done this thing with us on Cool Papa Bell. Where did he fit in this rearrangement?
Cool Papa, and there's some give and take that will come with these statistics, because they're only looking at the league games and not all the games that these guys played. These guys played so many games that you would almost be impossible to track them all. So they tried to reduce it to a window of 1920, when the leagues were formed, through 1948, a year after integration. And so when you look at Josh's official home run numbers, they're not going to look that impressive, because you're not accounting for all of them. When you look at Cool Papa Bell's stolen base numbers, probably don't look impressive at first glance, but you're going to have to be able to delve deeper into the numbers to really help discern just how great these guys were. Cool Papa Bell, for me, is the greatest base runner and base stealer this game has ever seen. And that would include the likes of my dear friend, the late great Lou Brock, and of course, the great Rickey Henderson, who set Major League Baseball's all-time stolen base record.
I thought I just seen you with him
a few years ago when he was here in town. Yeah.
Right.
Right. No, we had Rickey here, and man, it was, when you walk as a former athlete yourself, when you walk into the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, there is a level of reference, that just, you feel it. You feel a reverence, I should say, that you feel as a Black athlete, because you understand that you stood on the shoulders of these immortal giants. No matter what sports discipline you might compete in, if it's a team sport, you owe it to the Negro Leagues.
That's why I give you your props, that I think you have shined this spotlight over the last 5 years or more on young players that have just been about the money and the fame. You brought them into the Negro League, invited them. I've seen the different ones you brought in, and I think that have given them a different understanding of whose shoulders that they are standing on.
Well, I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. And I go back to last year when I had the opportunity to take Marshawn Lynch on a tour of the museum. Beast mode, football player.
Yeah, I seen that.
Yeah. And he brought Patrick Mahomes' dad, Pat Mahomes Sr., with him. And Carlos, I'll never forget this. The minute we walked in through the turnstiles, and you know, you go through the turnstiles and you look out onto the field where the statues are. And he stopped dead in his tracks. And he looked at me and he said, "Man, I feel something." Yeah, because you do feel their spirits. And even though he may play football to make his living, he knew that he was standing on these men's shoulders, and it wasn't lost on him. And it was just a beautiful thing to see. I mean, he's a funny
You
brother.
told me this is years ago, and I listened and I took it with a grain of salt. You said, Carlos, all these black sports, it all started with baseball. Then I started looking, the football, all of them played baseball. They might have been great in their sport, but they started playing baseball.
You know,
we don't see that as our community, I don't think.
No, we don't. And we played this game and we played it as well as anyone ever played the game. And we have a tremendous legacy in this sport. And it's eye-opening for a lot of my athletes when they come in here to kind of understand how significant baseball was in our community. Once upon a time, we loved baseball.
Yeah, Jackie Robinson played football.
Yeah, he was a great, matter of fact, baseball was his weakest sport. He was much better basketball.
That's what I'm saying. After you told me that, I'm like, man, what is Bob talking about? All roads lead to baseball. When I did just a little bit of looking into these dual athletes and because back then, when you're talking about the 20s and that, they might have played 3 or 4 sports.
Yeah, well, and that was the thing. You know, it saddens me today that we don't see the multi-sport athlete like we used to because, you know, they're almost forced now to specialize. And in whatever sport they play it year round. And I hate that. I understand it, but I hate it because I don't think that it gives that young athlete an opportunity to develop the way that they can develop. You know, at some point, your natural God-given ability will drive you back to the sport that you're best. But if you're just going to play, I don't care if it's baseball, if you're going to play baseball year round, then you're just kind of missing out on the opportunity that the other sports, they all kind of tie in. You know, you get a break. Number one, you get a break away from that primary sport, and then you work out other parts of your body, you know, so that I think that's part of the reason that I'm seeing all these rash of injuries, all these Tommy John injuries, because these kids are throwing too much too soon, and they're throwing breaking balls, and they're trying to hit the radar gun at such a young age, and they're playing a schedule that is damn near similar to a Major League Baseball schedule in a summertime. It's too much. And so, you know, you go play football or you go play basketball and it works out other parts of your body that ultimately helps you with the sport that you're actually, you know, is going to compete in.
How do you feel about this? And I don't know whether, you know how Jim Thorpe, they took his medals and stuff because I thought he played baseball or something down in Mexico. Has there been any reinstatement to any players that they disqualified behind some things like that?
None that I'm aware of. And,
yeah,
you know,
now that they're paying athletes, I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, and I think that's the thing. I mean, you know, I go back and I look at Major League Baseball's history, and you got guys like Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was banned from the major leagues for gambling. And that has always been an interesting thing because Shoeless Joe Jackson was illiterate. I don't think Shoeless Joe Jackson threw that World Series. Shoeless Joe Jackson played his tail off in that World Series, and he was, you know, hit with a lifetime suspension because of gambling, when quite frankly, there were other star players that were also gambling that I think baseball turned a blind eye to.
I think they still, with sports in general, I really don't approve of how they did Pete Rose.
Well, and I think it's really interesting. Pete Rose, in my own humble opinion, should be in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, he probably will never be in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, at least not while he's alive.
Right.
And I do, and I heard Buck say this on many occasions. He wished that Pete would have admitted to gambling long before, because he would have been suspended, and then probably by now they would have allowed him in. You know, he was kind of paid your debt, and then they would have ultimately allowed you in. So I don't know if it's ever going to happen for Pete in his lifetime. I just look at Pete as a baseball player and what he was able to accomplish as a baseball player. I mean, he was amazing. And
Tell
you
me
know, we do an
this.
event called a Hall of Game. And at some point in time, Pete Rose will be inducted into the Negro League Baseball Museum's Hall of Game because he played the game the way they played it in the Negro League. And he could have played in the Negro
Oh,
League.
that was enough. Boy, see, you beat me to my damn questions, Bob. Yeah, because I think it was you or somebody was telling me, you keep talking about this swag, that those Pete Rose was one of the only white boys that played like the black boys, sliding,
Oh man,
rough and tough, because
yeah, yeah.
that's what the Negro League was.
He played the game the
Him and
way that
George
they
Brett,
played it
I
in
will
the Negro
say.
Leagues. And I think that, and you know, when I say that, it is the ultimate compliment. I remember my good friend Dave Winfield. Big Dave Winfield had a relationship with a lot of Negro League players. And he would say they would sit him down and they would talk to him and they look at him and say, you know what? You were good enough that you could have played with us. And that is the highest
It's compliment.
compliment, you know, because, and Dave took it for just what it was, a great compliment. And here's Dave Winfield, a baseball Hall of Famer. But to sit there and talk with those old Negro League players and to get that kind of accolade from them, I think in many ways meant as much as being enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame.
Are there any other players that you think have been overlooked?
Oh,
If you'll
there are a
mention
ton. There are
mention a
a ton
couple
of
of them
them.
for our audience.
Yeah, no, you know, you'll see some names and people are gonna like, okay, I don't know who that is. You'll see the name Norman Turkey Stern. Turkey was his nickname, aka the Gobbler. And Norman Turkey Stearns is one of the greatest outfielders this game has ever seen. The legendary Cool Papa Bell said if Turkey Stearns is not in the Hall of Fame, then no one should be in the Hall of Fame. And he got his nickname Turkey because he stood at the plate in a pigeon-toed fashion. It looked really awkward. Didn't look like he could get around on it, man. But he was outstanding. And there, as I tell people, this turkey could flat out fly. You know, he could go get it, five-tool guy, had a great arm, great speed, power, hit for average. There was nothing that Turkey Stearns could not do on a baseball field. And maybe now that you see his name emerge in these statistics, maybe that will encourage people to want to learn about the likes of Turkey Stern, the likes of Artie Wilson, Chino Smith, these guys that are not household names, even in the Negro Leagues. There are certain guys, Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, those are household names within the world of Negro Leagues baseball. Most baseball fans have at least heard the names. Now, they may not know just how great these players were, but you likely heard their names. But
How
some of
about
these lesser known guys, the Oscar Charles and the
Foster?
Terry Stearns, Rube Foster,
Has anything changed with that? I think you
won't
the one who
change.
told me he was the Empire at one time.
Yeah, it won't change for him because Rube didn't play in 20. He was the organizer. His career was post 1920. So unfortunately, he's not included in the statistical data because they go from 1920 through 1948. So they go from the time that the Negro Leagues were established through a year after integration. So only a certain core group of players going to be tremendously impacted by this, but Rube would not be one of them because he plays well before 1920.
Uh, well, before we close out, Bob, is there anything that you want to say to our community? Uh, one more question.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know that y'all had planned to put some new exhibits.
yes.
I don't know whether you have started already.
Yeah, well, matter of fact, we're working on a brand new exhibition that celebrates the history of the great Kansas City Monarchs. you'll notice that when you come through the museum, we purposely did not put a great focus on the Monarchs because we did not want to give the impression that this was a Kansas City museum. We are a national museum that is headquartered in Kansas City.
Kansas City.
But the truth of the matter is, Carlos, we could have done an entire museum on the history of the Kansas City Monarchs because that history is that prolific and that profound. Well, as you know, this year marks the 100th anniversary of the very first Negro Leagues World Series. Our Kansas City Monarchs against the Hilldale Daisies out of Darby, Pennsylvania. And of course, the Monarchs would win that inaugural Negro League World Series, becoming Kansas City's first major professional sports team champion of any kind in 1924. And so we decided that we would create a new exhibit. It's going to be in our changing gallery that looks at the history of the Monarchs, a scaled down history, but to give people an indication of just how prolific this team was. We're talking about one of the greatest baseball franchises, not in Black baseball history, but in baseball history. One losing season in their almost 40-year existence in the Negro Leagues. And that was during World War II when so many of their star players had got called into service. They sent more players to the major leagues than any other Negro League franchise. They were a model baseball franchise. There are those who will say that the Kansas City Monarchs were the New York Yankees of the Negro Leagues. There are others who will say that the New
The
York
Yankees,
Yankees were the Kansas
yeah.
City Monarchs of Major League Baseball. They were that good. And so we get an opportunity to give people a chance to get a glimpse into this historic baseball franchise and in a city that hangs its hat on its championship pedigree. No professional sports franchise in our great city has ever won at the level that the Kansas City Monarchs did. And they should be remembered and they should be celebrated. And so that exhibit is going to open through the month of June, all the way through October 31st here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in our changing gallery. It is absolutely free of charge. I hope people will come and learn about Bullet Rogan and learn about some of the other great stars, Hilton Smith, Ted Strong, Hank Thompson, Willard Brown. The list goes on and on of legendary ball players. Jose Mendez, who was a Cuban, was the Monarchs' first manager, a Cuban. And James Leslie Wilkinson,
I got my
a
New York
white man.
Cuban hat, even
Yeah,
though it
exactly.
had nothing to do with the Monarchs. But
No, but that's
yeah,
okay.
but
It has
I got
everything to
that,
do.
baby.
Yeah, no, it has everything to do with how the Negro Leagues opened its doors
Right.
to any and everybody who could play. The only thing that mattered to them, they didn't care what color you were, they didn't care what gender you were. Can you play?
I like
That's
Bingo
all that mattered.
Long. And that movie there, I'm like, that gave me my introduction to these players that you talking about, who played Josh Gibson and Silly Richard Pryor. He was like, because they not letting no Negroes in the league, but I need to get in the league. I'm an Indian. Or
Yeah, well, and that movie, I tell the story of that movie, and if you have not seen Bingo Long, Traveling All Stars and Motor Kings, you owe it to yourself, whether it's on Netflix or whatever platform you can get it, to sit down and watch this movie because it is it's reached cult-like status now. It was a 1970s, early 1970s film produced by Barry Gordy and Motown, and it is based on a fictional novel by the same title. And so the movie was never intended to be an accurate portrayal of the Negro
but it
Leagues,
looked
but
like,
there absolutely, but there are some portrayals that are based on the Negro Leagues. And
and how they got run out of towns at night, the money. And
yeah,
but I really like, now this brings me back to Satchel. Them Negroes, when they finished playing and they would go to the Hoochie Coochie Club, they sharp as hell.
yeah, no, they were clean. And so But here's the funny story. If you read the book, and of course, for those who may not know, this they had an all-star black cast for this movie. So you mentioned Richard Pryor,
Billy
James Earl
D.
Jones, and of course Billy D. Williams, amongst a host of other great stars who were in this movie. But if you read the book, James Earl Jones' character was actually Bingo. And but when they casted Billy D. Williams into the film, Billy D was just coming off the blockbuster film Lady Sings the Blues. And they casted Billy D. Williams, and all the women were feeling Billy D. Williams. And so when they put Billy D. Williams in the movie, they were not going to put him in a catcher's mask for three-fourths of the film. And so they switched the
That's what
role.
happened.
Yeah, they switched the role and put James Earl Jones as the catcher, and then made Billy D. Williams the pitcher.
Did they really
And
have in the Negro League? You know more about this also. There's two last questions. One, I want to talk about blacks that are not now. That used to be a way out. Now they do basketball. But was it true about them getting their money after the games? Was it hard?
Hey man, it was challenging. You had fine, upstanding owners who paid on time. But those games like you saw in the film where these were not official league games, you ride into these towns, you play these town teams, and you hope you got your money, because you had to deal with a lot of that. And so they would play these town teams and they would ride in and they wouldn't beat the town team as bad as they could because it was a payday. And sometimes they would throw the game. And then every now and then they get tired of that mess and they tell the guy, you start the bus now because we're going to win this. But when we win, we're going to have to break out of here.
We had to get out of Dodge. So now talk about from that time, baseball was a major thing in the black community. I'm 72. I came up in the late 50s and 60s, and a lot of my friends played baseball.
Yeah.
And now you have people that are black and people of color, but they're not coming.
No, they speak Spanish.
Yeah. So what is being done, and has the Negro League, do they have anything that they're looking to partner with some people or talk a little bit about that?
I tell folks all the time, while we're here to preserve a very precious piece of baseball in Americana, we are still here to help grow our game. We're still here to promote the game. And so we feel like we have a responsibility because of the reason that you mentioned. We have such a proud legacy in this sport. Man, we played this game as well as anyone ever played this game. And it meant something to our community. And I hope when people come and visit the museum, that's what they grasp, that they walk away understanding our place in this game. Now we've got to transfer that and get more kids playing baseball again. And one of the things that I am so proud of that we've done, and I think it's having tremendous impact, Major League Baseball and the Players Association are implementing programs. Number one, Carlos, to bridge the economic divide. Our sport went from what I would call a blue collar sport where it was played on the sand lots to a country club sport. It is a pay to play sport that has really priced out a lot of kids from our game. All these specializations, you need a pitching coach and a hitting coach, the league fees, the travel fees, the equipment is extraordinarily expensive. And so it is very difficult for kids in the urban core to pay the expense that comes along. And the game is not being played on the sand lots like it was when you and I were kids. You didn't even need 9 on the team. You just got the neighborhood kids, you divided them up, and then you made your own rules as you went along. If you hit the ball in Miss Jones' yard, you were out.
I'm in the city where you playing in the damn street.
Exactly.
I mean, we ain't got no lot.
And so, but that's what baseball meant to us, and we want that back. And so one of the biggest things that we've done was we were able to get the Negro Leagues into the video game MLB The Show, the biggest baseball video game in the world.
Didn't know that.
And last year, for the first time, the Negro Leagues were included. We have a 5-year partnership with Sony PlayStation for the inclusion of Negro League. So in 2023, 8 players were introduced. This year, 10 players, and we'll continue to introduce more Negro League players into the video game for the length of this deal that we were able to broker with Sony. And man, let me tell you, it has been one of the biggest things that this museum has ever done.
All right, I'm
Video
cutting
game.
you off again. I wanted to know about the stamp, and the coin. See, this thing could be going forever. And the coin, but these are things that I know about that y'all.
Yeah.
The stamps. How has that gone? And the coin thing was supposed to be able to possibly raise a significant amount of money.
And we were
Where
able to
we at
raise,
with
we were
that?
able to raise some significant resources through the commemorative coin and the prestige.
Talk about that coin where our audience, if they would like to get one or whatever.
Well, the only way you can get them is you're going to have to find them on eBay and some places like that, because the way that the coins, the way the mint does this, you get about a year to sell these coins, and then they're taken off the market. So you can probably find them though in some of the
Describe what they are to our audience.
Well, it was for the first time we got a series of 3 U.S. Mint commemorative coins done to honor the Negro Leagues. So there was a gold, silver, and what they call clad. And you could buy the entire set or you could buy them individually. I mean, I still have some that I bought because I wanted my granddaughter to have them when she can really appreciate them. And it's something that I am as proud of that we were able to get done. And the reason I'm so proud of it, Carlos, is because in order to get a U.S. Mint commemorative coin released, it requires over 3/4 of Congress to sign off on it. And you know it is difficult to get the Democrats
you can't get them to
and the
sign
Republicans
off on toilet paper.
And they all stepped up to support this legislation. So, to see the Negro Leagues bridge both sides of the aisle, which was required to do this, speaks, I think, volume to how this museum is being received and the work that we're doing. And so, we were able to get that done. We were able
From
to
my point of view, cut you off again. Not the work the museum has been doing, even though you represent. I told you, since you got that position, you have put the Negro League front and center, not just here in the United States.
Yeah.
And I'm like, damn, do you work at the Negro League? Because you travel so much. There's no way I'm repping Cascade with all them trips.
Yeah, no, man. I tell you, it's been a blessing, Carlos. And like I said, the things that we've been doing, and like I said, the video game might be the biggest thing we've ever done. And here's why: we're talking millions upon millions of kids and young adults who are now learning about the Negro Leagues. But man, not only are they learning about them, they are falling in love with these players from the Negro Leagues. But you see, there's a misnomer that our children don't care about history. They do care, but it's also important on how history is presented to them. Right. And so I couldn't sit idly and wait for them and hope that they will come to the museum. I got to go to where they are. And I have to go to them in the modes and mediums in which they are accustomed to getting their information. And I am one that believes that experiential learning is the most meaningful and significant way for us to learn. You create an experience. Now, I know that our educators have to teach because they have to teach for kids to pass tests. I understand that. There's money. That's where you get your money. Kids passing tests. It hurts our children to a great degree. So when you can create an experience, you retain that. Man, there's a reason that we remember the lyrics of songs 30, 40 years after we've heard them. Now, I'll do whatever is required for me to pass this test. But the minute that test is over, it is forgotten because I don't really have a way that I'm going to apply it. But if I create an experience, and here's what's happening, these kids are loving these players from the Negro League. And Carlos, it has made me a household name in the gaming community because I am in the video game telling stories. Now, I never dreamt that I would be in a video game. And the kids are coming to the museum because they saw the museum in the video game and they're looking for the guy who's telling the stories in the video game. And I tell this story all the time. Last year, I was taking a group of potential investors. You may have heard that we're working on an effort to try and bring expansion Major League Baseball to Nashville. And when we're successful, the team would be called the Nashville Stars after the old Negro Leagues team. This would be the first time in baseball history that a major league team carried the name of a Negro Leagues team. So this is unprecedented. It would be game changing in a lot of ways from a revenue generation standpoint for the museum. And so I'm taking the guys on the tour of the museum and we get out on the field of legends and I'm going through the introduction of the players one by one, position by position. And we get to Satchel Paige. And I'm telling my Satchel Paige stories. And some of you may have heard me say in the past that Satchel had names for his pitches, and he did. So he didn't have fastball, curveball, changeup, slider. Not Satchel. Satchel had what he called his midnight creeper. He had the two humper. He had the bat dodger. He had the hesitation pitch. He had the long tom, the short tom, the jump ball, the trouble ball, the radio ball, the wobbly ball, the dipsy do. And he also had a pitch that he famously called his B ball. And I would always pose to my guests, do you know why he called it the B ball? And so when I raised the question, there was a young white kid standing right down the third base line with his father. Couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. And Carlos, he looks at me, he raises his hand, he sticks out his chest. He said, Mr. Kendrick, I know why Satchel called it the B-ball. I said, you do? Well, tell the folks why Satchel called it the B-ball. He says Satchel called it the B-ball because Satchel says it bees where I want it to be when I want it to be there. And man, I looked at him. I said, man, you must have been playing the show. And his father looked at me and said, yes, he's been playing the show and he's been listening to the stories that you're sharing in the video game. And it just touches you here because that's exactly what we wanted to have happening every day. It's not a day that goes by that someone doesn't hit me up on social media because they cannot get enough of these Negro League players and the stories that we're sharing in the video game. And so it is going to lead this museum into its next 30 years because we're creating new museum goers and fans of Negro League's history through all things of video game.
Can we now I'm not being self-serving, but I think that they deserve a shout out. The I Am King with Chris Evans.
Oh man, Chris has done an amazing job.
Do you want to give him a shout out and tell
Oh,
people what he's doing with his
oh man, I
organization?
mean, he has been one of the greatest advocates for baseball in our community for quite some time. And I just tip my cap to Chris and what he's done by creating a platform to spark the interest in baseball and help educate a lot of kids around our game. And man, you need those kinds of people in the community who, in many ways, they're doing God's work. And that's what Chris and his wife. I'd be remiss, if I left out his wife because she's right there with him. She's
Oh
right there with
boy, I can't even get my shirts and stuff done at they t-shirt king. I go there, they not there. She's like, I have to be at the games every day, and he's coaching now at
coaching over at
Lincoln,
Lincoln. Yeah.
and man, that is a yeoman's job
Yeah, it
to
is.
take that on in our community.
Yeah,
So
no, it is, and he and his wife are to be commended for the work they're doing. They are positively influencing the lives of a lot of young people through the sport of baseball. And in many ways, it speaks to what the Negro Leagues represented both on and off the field. So very proud of them.
So, what do you have to say in closing to our community and about inviting them and what they
Yeah.
should be
Well,
looking for the
you
next
know,
12
I
months?
always encourage our folks in particular to pay this museum a visit and to bring their families when they do. Because you know as well as I do, our history is not really a part of the pages of American history books. And so it is these cultural institutions like the Negro League Baseball Museum that essentially we get to learn about ourselves. Our history has always been an oral history. So your grandfather, your grandmother sat you down and they were going to say, boy, let me tell you about these ball players you should have known about. And that's how we got it. And so we're not represented properly in the pages of American history books, which makes these cultural institutions like the Negro Leagues Museum so tremendously valuable so that we gain a sense of self. And our journey in this country hadn't always been downtrodden. And I think that's what we've seen throughout history. I talk about this all the time. You've seen me enslaved. You've seen me seeking equality in this country through the civil rights movement and being sprayed by water hoses, the police dogs released on me, the police brutality that still manifests itself to this day. But man, my success stories are never talked about. Yeah, my success stories are never talked about. And you might be able to empathize with my struggles, but you can't really relate to those. But you can relate to my success stories. There are two sides of my journey. And my success stories are just as important as the struggles that I've had to endure seeking equality in this country. And the Negro Leagues is one of those great American success
But I
stories.
think it's a culture thing also, as Denzel Washington pointed out in something when he was trying to explain to some white people about the culture. It's like you don't know what it smells like to put a hot comb in. That's how and that's a culture thing, and that's how I'm relating to what you're saying
Yeah,
about our
yeah,
story and our
yeah. A-
voice.
And so our triumphs need to be also touted, and celebrated. And that's what we do here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. When you walk through this museum, I believe my guests walk away from here cheering the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail. They built something special. And we used to run a film, Carlos, it was narrated by former CNN anchorman Bernard Shaw. And in the film, Bernie says, you might say that the Negro Leagues were so good that they put themselves out of business.
I like that.
Yeah.
So you so in closing, what do you got to say about asking our community, the Kansas City community, speak to the black community, because I don't think that we're engaged as we should be with our heritage, right here in Kansas City. The same thing with the Jazz Museum. Uh, Invite them out.
Yeah, no, man. The doors are always open. We want them to come here and experience this museum. I want them to come in and see this free exhibit on the
That's what
Kansas
I
City
was going
Hall.
to ask.
Yeah,
When you have the free, because I know different corporations say we'll sponsor this.
yeah, yeah. I was so proud over the last 3 years, the Kansas City Royals have made the month of February free to the community. Anybody, not just Black community, but
Right, right,
anybody.
right, right.
But the fact that so many of us took advantage of that offer, and man, it just filled me
This
with
year they
immense pride.
did.
Oh, we had over 16,000 people come through here during the month of February. And to see Black families come here, that's what it's all about.
Tell
See,
me
that's when
this.
that history is being passed down.
What was the before they start doing that? What was the most people that had come in a month? How
It it
how
ranks
much
it
difference did that
it
make?
it ranks right up there at the very tip top. Now, in July of 2012, when Kansas City hosted the All-Star game, that might have been the highest single month that we've ever seen. That summer was, crazy. We've seen numbers around 17, 18,000. That's a big number for us in a month.
Right.
16,000 in February, and February was a short month. It's significant. And we've seen those numbers grow each and every year that the Royals have been doing this. What a tremendous contribution to the community and support of the museum, because they're paying for everybody to come see
And
them.
who are you working with the Royals? Let's give them a shout out.
Oh no, I mean everybody at the Royals Foundation, and of course it starts at the head of the organization with John Sherman, the owner of the Kansas City Royals. He and his wife are as philanthropic as anyone in our community, and he's always embraced the history of the Negro Leagues and what this museum represents, even before he took ownership of the Kansas City Royals. And so they're the ones, the foundation is the one that's making this happen. And it's something that we are excited about. We got the project right now with J.E. Dunn. They're celebrating their 100th anniversary. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Monarchs winning the World Series. And this year, every run that the Royals score, J.E. Dunn is donating $100 to the museum for every run that they score.
All right, where are we at? Boy, this damn interview is going long. Where are we at with the new facility?
Yeah, well,
Left that all the way out this damn interview. Talk
yeah,
about
no,
that.
man. We're excited. Last May, we announced plans to build a brand new 30 plus thousand square foot standalone Negro League Baseball Museum right around the corner from where we operate. The old Paseo YMCA, of course, Mr. Gates, Ollie Gates, has been a champion of that renovation of that historic YMCA. That's the birthplace of the Negro Leagues, and we are currently renovating that as we speak. That's going to be the future home of the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center. And then we will build a new facility adjacent to the historic landmark and create what I call, Carlos, a Negro Leagues campus as the gateway into historic 18th and Vine and an international headquarters for both Black baseball and social history. The project's going to price out somewhere between $25, $30 million, which is a significant investment by this museum in this neighborhood. But we wanted to also send a resounding message, because I know there were some who were concerned about whether or not the museum might move if a new stadium was done and that kind of thing. Our commitment to historic 18th and Vine is as strong as it ever was. And the fact that we are now looking at a $25, $30 million investment here in the district is tremendously significant. I am as excited as you can possibly be about having to go out and raise $25, $30 million. It's going to be a daunting task, but man, we got a pathway to get there. And I can't wait for us to finish this facility. We are in the early stages of a capital campaign. You worked in construction. You know how expensive these projects, they only get more expensive as time passes. Nothing is cheaper.
Right. The sooner you can get it done, the better off you
Better.
are.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But man, we've run out of space in our current home, both from an exhibit standpoint as well as our administrative offices. And the demands on the museum are growing every single day. People want information. They want to come schedule tours. They want traveling exhibitions. All these things that are happening because of all the energy that we're seeing around the Negro Leagues. And we need to be able to continue to meet those demands. And so we need to grow administratively, and we don't have a place to do so. we've tapped completely out of space. So it really dictated a need to have to build a new home. But man, think about this. This museum started in a one-room office that wasn't big as this office that I'm sitting in. And now we are on the really on the threshold of building this international headquarters for the Negro League Baseball Museum. What a journey it has been over the last 34 years of operations for this museum, a museum that no one initially gave any chance of succeeding. And here we are now recognized as America's national Negro League Baseball Museum. And so I'm excited about this project. I want to get this museum built. It will be a legacy project, not just for me, but everyone who supports this effort, who will be involved with this. We are, in essence, leaving a legacy. You don't get to do that too often in this crazy world that we live in. And I also want to do what our institutions are more times than not underappreciated and certainly underfunded. And so my hopes is that we will create a significant operating endowment for this museum so that we'll be able to operate into perpetuity long after I've hung up the cleats and moved on and play golf every day.
All right. Hey, Bob, I think this was a very informative interview. I probably have to do this like I did Slide.
Yeah,
This up
yeah.
in a couple of key
Exactly.
segments, about 4 segments. And I don't care what you say about these other people with the Negro League, Bob, none of this would be happening without you. I don't give a shit what you talking about, giving everybody else this credit. I've been there. I was right across the street from you. I know where the Negro League was. It was mired down in politics. It was mired down in a bunch of crap, and they didn't get anything done. And you almost had to start from a standing still start. It wasn't like pass the baton, we got some momentum. There was no momentum. And from day one, you had to crawl, walk, and now you're not running, but you're jogging. And Buck,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sending Willie the Groundhog another. Give this to Buck.
Give it to Buck.
You have
Buck.
been major his mentorship with you. I'm just surprised you ain't saying for 3-4 years couldn't talk to you unless you was mentioning Buck in one of the damn stories about.
Yeah, yeah.
And that seemed like that has been a driving.
It will forever be at the forefront of my role here at the museum. You know, I tell people this all the time, and it's true. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about Buck O'Neil. And I talk to Buck almost every day. Now, he doesn't always talk back to me.
Oh, you worse
But
than me. That's me. I'm always saying, Willie the Groundhog, go tell him this or go tell her this.
So no, man, it's for me, it's just great reverence when I think about Buck, what he did for this museum, and what an honor it is for me to walk in his footprint. You can't feel Buck's enormous shoes. You would be silly to think that you could feel his shoes. But there are a lot of people who would be scared to walk in his footsteps, and because his shadow looms so large. But see, I don't worry about his shadow looming over me because for me, his shadow protects me. He is guiding my footsteps. And so, no, I will forever pay honor to Buck O'Neil. And as long as I have anything to say about it, Buck will always live here at the Negro League Baseball Museum.
Excellent. So, as we always say in closing, when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Good night.
This program is brought to you by the City of Fountains Coaches Association.